Opening the afternoon for the new topic of the next big things in fintech is our own content board member, Susanne Chishti, talking about getting close to a crystal ball, the power of fintech founders, and the importance of diversity in a changing world.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the second part of today's Fintech London week. We're very excited to have you all here with us. And I want to talk to you about what fintech means at the core and looking into the future. So really, what are the next big things in fintech, getting close to a crystal ball? A little bit information about myself. I'm Susanne Chishti, the founder and the CEO of FINTECH Circle. Initially, I'm from Vienna, from Austria. I came to London more than 20 years ago in order to work in banking and in consulting. And then I left commercial banking, investment banking, 2014 to launch FINTECH Circle. And what we do is we invest in fintech startups. So we run an investor network here in London where we invest in fintech startups, early stage. And we also work with established companies to connect the various stakeholders. What we also do is we publish books, and I also sit on the board of a couple of fintech companies, both listed and unlisted, and also a bank here in the UK. What we do in fintech is really focused initially on what I call it the most important part is connecting capital to those fintech entrepreneurs who need it most to launch their businesses, to scale up their companies. So this is our investor network, our fintech investor network. We also work with our partners, with clients, with companies around us to help those startups grow and scale up, and also our expert community of authors, of co-authors, co-editors of the FinTech book series. And then all around us is our global community of more than 130,000 people who follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, online, where we can share the latest fintech trends. And today, what I wanted to do is to give you a short summary of what we have learned, looking and talking to those cutting-edge entrepreneurs, what is coming up next, and what we see as the big three trends which will shake up the financial services sector in the future. These are just a couple of companies we invested in as angel investors. You see the last row being Albert and My Future Now. Those companies were sold already, so we had 3 exits. One company was sold to Santander, which was Albert. Bean was sold to My Future Now. And Bean was sold, to comparethemarket.com, and My Future Now was acquired by Legal & General. So we see lots of activities taking place in the fintech sector where large corporations acquire startups or scale-ups, but even we see fintech companies acquiring smaller fintech companies. So the environment, the ecosystem is really growing and booming, and maybe even more so during Corona. So I promised you to talk about 3 key trends. And these 3 trends, which we are looking at and which we have followed over the last 12, 18 months, are embedded finance, green finance, and a huge global financial inclusion and progress in financial inclusion. And I want to talk to you in detail about what these 3 trends mean. The first one is about embedded finance. You might have heard this term before. And embedded finance, at the nutshell, is when a financial service like payments is part of another service, which can be a non-financial brand, and which is able to create a seamless customer experience. It can also mean that financial services are integrated in other products, so not just payments, it can be insurance, can be lending. And we often talk about invisible finance. So when we take an Uber, we take Free Now, those invisible finance transactions is all part of the embedded finance sector. And when you look at the payment sector within this embedded finance segment, they have grown exponentially, and we are expected to grow even more in the next few years. So embedded financial payments are expected to grow to about 140 billion in the next 4 years, from 16 billion at the beginning. So we see an enormous growth in this segment. And when you think about what embedded finance means, when you go deeper, it can mean embedded payments, embedded insurance, embedded lending, embedded banking, so very sub-verticals. And I give you one example of what it means for you as a client. And that's something which doesn't exist yet. But when you imagine that at some stage you want to buy a new flat or you want to buy a house, and you went to the property sites, to look for your new home. And at the moment, we're looking at the property information. We see the information, the floor plan, the price, all that online. But if you want to buy this property, it becomes complicated. We need to talk to the mortgage company, to the lawyers, to the insurers. It's all not at all embedded. It's the opposite at the moment. But embedded finance would mean that if you want to buy your future home, you buy with one click. And you click on this real estate website, they find the right mortgage provider for you. It's embedded in the sales process. You get the right insurance for your home, and the payment is done not just to the buyer or to the seller of the property, but also to the mortgage company. It's done to your solicitors and anybody else you have to pay. So this would be the ideal scenario of embedded finance in the future, is as an example when we buy homes, when we buy flats, where you can see how well this would help us to create a very complex process and make it much, much simpler and much faster. One case study I wanted to share with you is Channel Capital, who do embedded finance as a service, you could say. So they provide the embedded finance solution and as a way of funding as a service. And you have heard about, Klarna as a sponsor of today's conference as well, focused, we know the Klarna logo. And Channel Capital is a company where you don't necessarily need to know the logo because it will be embedded and will be empowering other companies to offer embedded finance to their customers. So it's a B2B solution of embedded finance. The second trend I wanted to cover today with you is green finance and green fintech. And this is basically at the intersection of climate change and ESG. And these are topics, we talk and we heard, all of you heard about it a lot, but it's very meaningful. And today when we listened to Lord Holmes, I remember when he said, we owe it to all those people who lost their lives during Corona that we rebuild our economy in a better way now. And green finance, green fintech can help with that. And one way, when we think about how we define green finance, it's really about all the investment opportunities to invest in those green finance projects to allow people to invest in a sustainable way. And on the left side of this chart, you see examples. It can be climate change. It can be about renewable energies. It can be about non-climate change related things such as biodiversity, for example. So we have got a waste processing. So those different types of areas which green finance allows to be funded, and they are often funded by things such as green bonds. And the green bond market is incredibly growing as we speak now, and the value of green bonds could soon hit more than $2 trillion, which is enormous in size. And the top 3 green bond issuers are at the moment the United States, it is China, and it's France. So these are the 3 countries who do the most in terms of green finance, empowering and issuing green bonds. And of course, green finance can help us to help in the recovery from COVID-19. So this page here, you've seen, these are the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, we refer to them. And what I've done, I put a circle around those SDGs which can be supported by fintech. And when you think, these are quite a bit, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 of those SDGs, almost half, can be empowered by financial technology, which is enormous when you think about it. And I think it shows the importance and the relevance of our industry to make a change, how we all live our lives, and how we can support the SDG goals. And of course, we always celebrated COP26 later on this year, which takes place in the UK, to help and to talk about new regulation, new support for how to implement SDG overall. We also have a new benchmark being developed. This is called a new global benchmark, which will actually track what the financial systems does and what the biggest institutions in the world do. And so this benchmark will matter a lot because often what we don't measure, we can't count and it doesn't happen. And so far we don't have benchmarks to actually measure the compliance with SDG goals across financial services. But this is a new benchmark now being developed, the financial systems benchmark by the World Bank and by the United Nations in cooperation with all our key and largest financial institutions in the world. So it's something to remember that's coming and will launch in the next 2 years. And last but not least, I want to talk about financial inclusion. I remember when I started at FinTech, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we spoke about 2.5 billion people at that time who had no bank accounts. And here in our Western countries, we often always looked at the emerging markets. We looked at Asia, Africa, and talked about the unbanked population, which is enormous in size. Unfortunately, and of course, where FinTech can do enormous help in order to allow people who are unbanked to actually transact and to have financial access to financial services. But what we have not yet realized is that financial inclusion is an issue we also face in the UK, we also face in the States, because so many people, even here, have no bank accounts. Who would have thought that in the UK we've got 4 million people with no bank account? It's almost, shocking when I saw these numbers first. Or in the United States, it's 35 million people with no bank accounts. So how do they survive? How do they live their lives if they have no access to a bank account? And in the USA, there are also statistics being published which say that 40% of Americans have got less than $400 in their bank account. So can you imagine if the fridge breaks or the car breaks? I mean, they have not much more money left to feed their family. So financial inclusion really is a global issue, a global problem, and it is so important that we solve it in order to help people lead a dignified life, because that's what it comes down to. How can you lead a dignified life if you have no access to the basic needs? And I tell you a story. A few years ago, I was in South Africa, and I was giving a FinTech masterclass to people in Johannesburg. And then I met a FinTech company, and they deal with the unbanked, in Africa, and they deal with the unbanked freelancers, the kind of the unbanked. I mean, we would call them freelancers here in the UK, but it's in South Africa. It's often marketplace traders. They buy in the morning, they buy fruits, vegetables, they sell it on the market, and at the end of the day, they've made a small margin, and that's how their business operates. And often those market traders have no bank account. And often many of them, I've seen that they live on the roads, on the streets, they don't have a home either, so they have no address which they would need to open a bank account with. And what we have seen, therefore, is the issue is how would they ever prove that they are credit worthy? Because without a bank account, you've got no credit history. So how do you prove that you're credit worthy? So what is being done by some companies is they use the mobile phone data instead. They check how do you pay your mobile phone on time? Where do you charge your phone? It's something which I found interesting. So they checked, is the phone being charged in a home, which means you've got electricity at home. Can you not charge your phone at home, but you have to go outside to a kiosk, meaning you have no electricity at home. So it's a different world, but those different data points help to provide these microloans to unbanked in order to help them, run their businesses and help feed their families. So, and what I believe is that financial inclusion is such an important topic because it is part of the ESG agenda. It's part of our goals to rebuild, our economy better. I wanted to give you a great example of one fintech company in Singapore who does it very well. So they have got target farmers. And they target those companies, those farmers basically, who have got livestock, but they don't have enough money to feed the livestock and they feed the animals. So what you can do, you can actually record, which we call tokenize, tokenize your livestock, so record your animals on the blockchain on your mobile phone. Then you can insure your animals and you can get a microloan for them in order to help you run your farm and help you feed your animals. So this is one example which I found fascinating, where you can see it really. It's when we think about blockchain or distributed ledger, it can be very complicated. But the key thing in fintech to make it mainstream is to turn those very complex solutions into very simple offerings to end clients who couldn't care less about the technology. These farmers couldn't care less if it's tokenized or blockchain. They just want to survive. They want money to feed their cows. And so that's what fintech can deliver if we do it right. That's what this company does. If you want to read more about fintech, you can go also in our fintech, books, which I mentioned before. So we published several books, 6 as part of the fintech book series on fintech, on wealth tech, insurtech, paytech, AI, and also legal tech. Legal tech is another really interesting sector which really impacts ESG, impacts access to finance as well, because so many people worldwide are excluded from legal support, from lawyers, because they can't afford legal representation. And legal tech, again, helps you how to do that. So that's a very important part of the fintech universe. And also the last book we published is called Fintech for Dummies. Lastly, I wanted to invite you to join a film. Last year, we published the first film, which is called The Future of Fintech. It's published on our website at fintechcircle.com. And this year, we said we will produce the first film on responsible fintech, because that's what we need to do to grow up. As a sector, we need now to be responsible in the way we support the society overall, we support other businesses. And so we named the word responsible fintech, and we are creating the first film about it, produced with ITN. And anybody of you in the audience who works on responsible fintech innovation, get in touch with me, because we want to feature the best entrepreneurs, investors, who play a role in responsible fintech in this film, which will be produced after the summer. And so we at the moment, lining up and choosing which innovations we want to film and want to report on. So that's in summary information on these key trends. So again, in summary, it's embedded finance, green fintech, and it is all about financial inclusion to create a fintech world and a finance world which will incorporate all the amazing innovation which we have developed over the last few years, all the investors, all the entrepreneurs who are here today, and also all the clients, who are benefiting from financial services on their mobile phones, who are benefiting from access to capital, which they didn't have before. And when I think about the role which we played in fintech during the corona crisis, providing loans to companies, providing government support, to the wider economic system, I think we managed to do a really good job. And now we want to step up even further, to do even more. And as part of this, one key thing also is diversity and inclusion. And I know that we have got many women here as well in our conference room, and we want more of you to lead companies, to lead boards, to lead fintech companies. As an investor, often we don't see enough female entrepreneurs who raise funding or who want to raise new rounds. So that's, I think, a key thing that we want to create in a very inclusive environment where everybody feels home in fintech and everybody sees a future, because at the end of the day, in 20 years' time, I believe fintech will replace finance. So there only will be a fintech sector and there won't be any traditional financial service anymore, because fintech is the future. So with that, thank you all very much. Thanks for joining me today.